Hi everyone, welcome to episode 2 of Openings Net. In this episode we're going back in time to start with to the 17th century and look at a game of Greco's. So Greco was an Italian chess player from the 17th century. He was a professional chess player. He actually traveled and played in various places and gave lessons, had clients that he wrote manuscripts for. And in these manuscripts he wrote down his games, and these were later collected and published. So these are some of the oldest surviving recorded games of classical chess. Now we don't know actually if these were games that were played. All we know is that he wrote them down and gave them to his clients. So they could have been compositions, but they might have been actual games too. And we don't know who was playing. So by convention, the side with the white pieces is Greco, and the side with the black pieces is labeled NN for person unknown, I guess. So this game starts off d4, and black answers b6. And this is known as Owen's defense, and we'll talk a little bit more about Owen's defense in the next game, but let's just continue with this game. d4 is the most common response even today, and it's very logical. Just grab control of the center while you have the chance. This move did not do anything about the center, but the next move does. So black has not forgotten about the center entirely. He's putting pressure on this pawn. It has to be defended. And the most common way to defend is actually with bishop d3. Might look a little bit funny, but you often have to play bishop d3 anyway, because after the knight comes out, it could get pinned, and you still have to worry about defending that pawn. So, and the bishop is not bad on this square. If this pawn comes forward, the bishop has got a clear view of the king side, so it's not a bad move, and still the most popular move today. And then here's the move, f5. This is known to chessgames.com at least as the Matovinsky gambit. And I did a search for Matovinsky. I could not find him in the chess games database, and I could not find him even in the mega database of ChessBase. So the only place where this is called the Matovinsky gambit is in chessgames.com. I could not find another reference to it, so I don't know if that's a valid name, but that's the name we have, so we're going with it. In any case, the first instance of it was played in this game against Greco. So Greco with the white pieces takes the pawn, and of course the idea was that that pawn was shielding this pawn on b2 here, g2. And so black can just take that pawn. And it looks like white is losing material, but in fact black has weakened his king side seriously, and white has a good move here. So if you haven't seen this before, you don't know the answer, you might want to take a minute here, pause the video, and see if you can figure out what's the best move for white. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. The best move is queen g5, queen h5 check, and then pawn here, blocking the queen. So you take that pawn, and now there's a couple of possible moves here. The move in the game was knight to f6, after which g takes with check. The knight came out so he could take the queen, but then the bishop comes here with check, and that is game over. That is checkmate. So actually it was a forced mate in two after the knight came out. Now that is a very cute little gambit and a nice trick to know. One thing you should know here is that that's not the only answer, and if black wants to keep fighting, black can play the move bishop to g7 in this case, and it's not yet game over. In fact, we'll show an example of that in a bit. But let's go back and let's talk about the Owens defense in general. The next game I wanted to show you was also played in London, England in 1858 between Paul Morphy and John Owen. And this is the Owen that Owen's defense is named after, and it's rightly named after him. He played this regularly against his opponents in England. John Owen was an English amateur chess player, but he was one of the top players in the country, and he was also an English vicar, so he's sometimes called Reverend Owen. Anyway, Morphy is starting off with e4 here, and Owen replies b6, playing as Owen's defense. Morphy plays d4, and Owen goes bishop to b7, and Morphy goes bishop d3. And as I said, this is still the main line. I did want to point out, as a little bit of coverage for the Owens defense, you can play knight c3, and that maybe avoids that f5 line, although, as we saw, that was nothing to be afraid of. And play might continue like this, say e6, knight to f3, get both the knights out. This is good play for white. And then bishop here, pinning the knight, and then you need to bring the bishop out to d3 anyway to defend this pawn. Yeah, so the thing to keep in mind is that this pawn is always under fire, but actually white is doing well in this opening, and you just have to do what you can to maintain this strong center here, and you'll be fine. Okay, let's go back to the game. So bishop to d3 is often played right away, since you have to play that anyway. It's the top choice. Knight c3 is the second choice in the database at this point. But yeah, since bishop d3 needs to be played anyway, why not play it here? So Owen plays e6, and then Morphy plays knight h3. Now knight h3 is an unusual move. It's not bad, though. White still keeps an advantage. The top choices here, though, if we back up, are c4 and knight to f3. And both of these moves keep a comfortable advantage for white. White just has easy development and better control of the center, and you just have to take care not to push too soon and take care it doesn't get undermined. And we'll see some of these themes playing out in this game. Anyway, knight to h3 is an interesting move. It keeps the knight out of the way of the f-pawn, so maybe Morphy was fond of pushing his f-pawn forward. Maybe that's an idea here at some point. Also, this knight maybe could come back to the f4 square. Another idea would be to play f3 and bring the knight back around this way. But anyway, let's continue with the game. Owen plays c5. Now notice how after his initial development, which seemed to ignore the center, the pawn b6, bishop b7, he has focused on the center since then. He's put this pawn here to keep these pawns from advancing. He put the bishop here to attack, and he put the pawn here to attack. So he is going after the center. Morphy shores it up. He goes ahead and exchanges here, and then plays knight to c6, putting pressure on that pawn again. So the other bishop comes out and defends. It looks a bit funny if you haven't seen this setup before, but actually it's a very solid setup for white with the two pawns here, the bishops behind it. White just has easy development for his pieces. There's open lines for the bishops, and he has control of the center. So white is better here, but black has chances at counterplay, as we'll see. So the knight comes here, hitting the bishop, and Morphy ignores that and keeps developing. So knight takes, queen takes. For the moment, black has the bishop pair, but actually he gives it back right away. He brings his bishop out, white castles, and then he exchanges off this knight. And Morphy takes back with a pawn, so he's got this strong center still. So I imagine Morphy is pretty happy with this game. The computer likes white's position here as well. It's good development for white. This knight still needs to be sorted out, what Morphy is doing with that knight. But aside from that, white has a lead in development. Black is still 2 moves from castling. And white has that nice center control. But, well, it's not a game-ending advantage. It's an advantage for white, but the game still has to be played. So knight f6. Morphy goes with e5 right here. Now, actually, at this place, at this point, the computer really likes the move f3. And this makes a lot of sense. Shoring up the center against these pieces that are attacking it, and just making this knight look kind of useless. And if black plays the normal-looking move d5 to try and weaken the center, then white can push on with e5, and the knight can't come forward. It's got to go back. So knight d7 was recommended. Looks like white is squashing black pretty hard there. So Morphy played e5. He probably wasn't concerned about the knight coming forward because he was planning to play c4 and kick that knight anyway. But this is not so great for white, actually. Black could have, he didn't play this, but he could have taken that bishop and then just castled. And actually black is doing a fine just there. The computer line goes like this, knight f4, trying to get the knight in, and then queen here. And yeah, black is actually slightly better. He's coordinating his queen and his bishop. The knight is defending here, so it's not like white is in huge trouble, but and the computer gives the edge for black in that position. Anyway, black didn't play like that. Black played the interesting move, bishop to a6, pitting this pawn. And so Morphy just drops the bishop back. Since black didn't take the bishop, he figures he might as well preserve it. And now rook to c8. So I think Owen is playing an interesting game here, piling up pressure on the pinned pawn. And Morphy just defends with rook to c1. Very straightforward. There was an interesting tactical move here. He could have considered queen to g3. So the queen on g3 hits this pawn. Pretty interesting. And it also threatens this knight at the same time. So it's kind of double attack. But, well, after pawn takes knight, there's bishop takes rook. It's a little bit complicated. And after queen takes pawn, the rook goes to f8. So maybe Morphy just wanted a simpler position, and he thought he would probably win this anyway. So he's doing fine here with rook a to c1 as well. It's just that was an interesting opportunity there. So castles, and now he moved his queen to b3. Actually, the computer likes moving the rook out, rook f to e1 slightly better, but let's continue. The knight now has to run. The knight goes to e7, bishop to b4, pinning that knight, and rook to c8, defending the knight, and rook f to d1. Right here, actually, this knight is going to get active, and the computer is recommending just bishop takes knight. But let's continue with the game. After rook f e1, the knight comes out to f5. So once again, we see Owen following a consistent strategy of putting pressure on the center, and Morphy plays a bit riskily with g4, kicking that knight. Knight comes over to h4, and yes, looks like he's taking some chances here. You know, if the bishop gets back to b7, there's some coordination against the king side, or maybe knight here. Things to watch out for, but well, Morphy pushes on with f4, so maybe that was the idea of this knight h3 move, just to get out of the way of the f-pawn and support it coming forward. f6 from Owen, bishop to e1, hitting the knight here, and now f takes e5, defending the knight. The queen defends the knight, and d takes e5. So the queen goes to e7. Actually, bishop b7 right there would have been a strong move for white. Just instead of the queen move, put the bishop here and try and take advantage of the light squares. Well, that's going to happen in a moment or two anyway. Let's see, knight to g5, bringing the knight out and interfering with the queen's defense of the knight. h6, kicking the knight, so we've got both knights under attack here. This knight goes to e4, and the bishop goes to b7 here, hitting the knight. So now, once again, we have both knights under attack. The queen moves back to d3, defending. And, oh yeah, in this position, the queen defends that knight. So that's not a problem. The rook goes to f8, looking at this loose f-pawn. So bishop takes, decides to get rid of that annoying knight there. Not having to worry about the coordination of knight and bishop is handy. And now this is the position where Morphy uncocks one of his famous combinations. So if you want to see if you can spot a good move here, see if you can find what Morphy played in this position. Okay, I'm giving the answer away now. The move Morphy came up with was knight to f6 check. And this is a killer blow. First of all, if the king runs this way, then queen here is mate, so it can't run that way. If the king runs this way, There's actually a mate here too, a little more complicated. Queen here, check. Oh, let's go ahead and play it. King here, queen here, check. King runs, and now if okay, and then you check again with the pawn, and if the king keeps running, then this is actually a mate here. This is very cute. The queen is delivering the mate. The pawns are preventing the escape, and the knight is defending this pawn here. Let's back up, and so take the pawn to put up the stiffest resistance. Queen takes. The king has to go back, and then rook here, and that was all forced. So the king can't run. In this position, the knight has to be taken. But if you take with the pawn, this is big trouble, because after this check, the king moves, the rook comes in, and this is not mate, but black has to give up the queen in order to stop the mate, so it's a win. And so that leaves this move that Owen played. It's the only way to get rid of the knight and stay in the game. So he played rook takes pawn, but now Morphy is up the exchange here. Now it's not completely over, because there's still stuff. There's still a lot of force on the board, and Owen decides to take the queens off and go for an endgame here. So this is still better for white, but it's actually not such a huge advantage. Let's see, the bishop went to c6, f takes g7, king takes, and if we pause for a second, we see that white has some weak pawns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and black has a pawn and a bishop for the exchange. Now white should still go on to win this, but let's play this out. King f6, g4, h5 to undermine, g5 check, king f5, coming forward with the king, and king e3. Actually, this is a mistake from Morphy. The king really needed to, if we back up, the king really needed to go this way, because this pawn was starting to become a menace. It's not a fatal mistake, but a little slip. Maybe he was relaxing a little bit after having won the exchange and just expecting the game to go his way from here on out. But it seemed like he had a plan here for dealing with this advancing pawn. Rook d2. Oops, I'm sorry. Rook d2, not rook c2. h3. And this is the last mistake from Morphy. He put the rook here, and after this bishop move, black is winning all of a sudden. So that plan, if that's how he planned to deal with that pawn, was not a good one. He can still kind of salvage his position with the clever move rook to g1, going for counterplay, trying to push this pawn while black tries to push this one. And yeah, after rook g1, rook to h8 to get the rook behind the pawn, g6, h2. I couldn't have pushed right away, but now Morphy can actually sacrifice the rook and push. And this turns out to be better for white. So this was still okay. That wasn't all best play from black, but I was just showing how this move rook to g1 functioned, and getting these counterplay threats going. So this is still end in a draw, I think. But instead, Morphy played the move rook to h2, and after that, after bishop to g2, then actually the game is lost. So the game continued, rook to c2 here, d5, and this is the problem. There's too many weaknesses here. This is a weak pawn. The rook is pinned. The king can't come over and save the pawn or unpin the by defending the rook, because that would lose the f-pawn. The king is needed to defend the f-pawn here. So the king is kind of overloaded. It wants to defend here to unpin, and it wants to defend here to keep from losing the pawn. It can't do everything. So there's actually no good answer here. Morphy tried g6. So loses a pawn here, g7, gets the rook out of the way. And oh, he goes ahead and takes the takes the bishop here, getting a rook behind the passed pawn. The king goes back to f6 to round up this pawn, though. So that pawn is gone. Morphy switches his rook to c2. Rook takes pawn, rook takes pawn. And then rook to g3 check. King goes to e4. And the rook went to a3. This rook dropped back to c2 defending. And now rook to a4 check. And Morphy resigned. So this is just a winning endgame. And notice that his king can't come forward. All these squares are covered by the pawn and the king. So the king has to go back, which means he's going to be forced into some passive position, maybe with the king here. Erase that, maybe king here and rook here defending both pawns. And there's just no way to hold it. After that, black's extra pawn will push through. So he resigned. So one of the few losses of Morphy. Now after this, he beat Owen a couple of times, and then they later played a match at pawn odds where Owen gave Morphy odds of a pawn, gave him Morphy, I think it's, Morphy plays black and gives up a pawn, and Morphy won the match. So Morphy was the better player, but Owen had his day in this game and showed how that Owen's defense works. So just to highlight some of the key points of the opening, if you are ever faced with this opening and you want to play against it, just taking the center is good. Defending the pawn with either the bishop or the knight is good. And then, just remember that you have to really take care of that center and hold on to it. And normal development here is fine. You can go with knight f3 or with the other knight even, or pawn to c4. Let's back up. Pawn to c4. I guess if you're going to play knight c3, you would have done that earlier. But pawn to c4 is nice because it allows the knight to come out behind the pawn. And so you should be okay if you just play like that. Just watch for tactics along the diagonal. Expect this knight to come out and be prepared. Have a plan for how you're going to defend that f-pawn. But overall, you're in good shape because you have the big center and the better development. Okay, there's one more game I wanted to show you. I wanted to return to the Matovinsky gambit, the subject I started this video with. So the last game I wanted to show you was played in 1974 at the US Open. It's between William Lombardy, who was a frequent sparring partner of Bobby Fischer. You've probably seen many Fischer-Lombardy games. And his opponent with the black pieces was Ken Reagan. Now Lombardy was an international master, and Reagan was a strong player, a young player at the time, not yet an international master, but on his way. And this was an interesting battle. Lombardy started off with d4. Reagan played b6, Lombardy played e4, and Reagan played bishop b7. So this is the same Owens defense that we saw previously. Earlier we were looking at white starting with e4 and then playing d4, but you can reach this position from either move order. Bishop to d3 played by Lombardy, and Reagan kicks off the Matovinsky gambit here with f5. So what is he thinking? Doesn't he know that Greco showed 400 years earlier that, let's see, from 1619, 340 years earlier, I guess, or 50, that you can't play this way? Anyway, he plays that anyway. So Lombardy takes. Bishop takes g2. Got to grab that rook. Queen h5 check. Pawn to g6. F takes g6. And now knight to f6 here, attacking the queen, leads to a mate in 2, as we saw in that first game. But there is another move here. I think I mentioned this. You can play bishop to g7. And looking at it today with a computer, this is the best move for black in this position. Now, black is still worse, but it starts to get a little bit tricky. And let's watch how the game goes from here. So pawn takes with check. It's a discovered check on the king. The king has to go to f8. It's the only move. And Lombardy played the natural move, pawn takes knight. He's just cashing in. pawn takes knight. This is actually not the strongest move in this position. And after king takes g8, the queen has to move. Queen goes to g4. And then the bishop gets to take the rook. So in this line, black is actually up the exchange. So he's won some material. But he is his king position looks pretty desperate. But he does have a rook and a bishop here, and he's got some other pieces that might come over to join the defense. In other words, it's not game over. So it's not quite so simple. In fact, there's no clear line that really destroys black at this point. Here's the strongest line that I could find. The computer likes to play knight to f3 here. So just leaving all these things hanging. Well, this pawn is not hanging. The rook is hanging. But actually, it's not... we'll get to that. Let's see. It's the black first decides to save his knight and attack the queen. So he can do that. It's better than grabbing a piece. So the queen has to move. The queen goes to g6, holding on to this pawn. And there's also ideas on this open G file against the king with this pawn here. But this pawn is actually in trouble now with the knight. The knight and the rook are attacking it. So bishop takes f3 is the best move here for black. Let's back up a second. One thing you might consider is bishop takes rook, but this fails, and it's kind of a typical thing you expect to see in these kind of openings. Bishop comes out here. Rook can take the pawn now and defend the bishop. There was a threat to just mate there. But then the knight can hop in here, and things fall apart for black at this point. Let's see, king g8 trying to defend everything. Knight takes h7. This knight goes back to e8. Now he's got to worry about defending that pinned bishop. The knight can hop back to g5. Let's see, black is sort of out of moves here. e5 is played, maybe with the idea of sacrificing the queen here in the right circumstances just to survive. But there's this check. The king runs. Then bishop takes g7 check. The king, knight takes. Then this check and the king runs. And then the queen can take here. King runs. And then you've got knight to f7 check. And this actually leads to mate, but you can also just win the queen. You also did just win the queen if you want it. So that falls apart pretty quickly. So you cannot take the rook. So let's go back to this position here. Right here. So, well, to remind ourselves how we got here, that was you take here with check. Back. Okay, you take here, bishop goes here. You take here with check. King runs here. So this is all best play for both sides. Lombardy took the knight, but you can play knight f6 here, or knight f3 here. Black plays knight f6, hitting the queen. Queen goes to g6, and in this position we can't take the rook. Black can't take the rook, but black can take the knight. And white can still get a good game here. Like I said, now there's this open and winning. By good game, I mean winning. White putting the rook here. The rook gets to take the pawn, but now there's this tactical sequence here, starting with queen g3, hitting the bishop. And this is pretty deadly. It's hitting the bishop, and the bishop is hitting that rook. So about to win some more material. And if the rook ever gets taken, this bishop here is next to the king is hanging as well. So too much is hanging. Bishop e4 is the best try, and it seems to hold on to a lot of things. Right, the rook is still defending the bishop. The bishop is defending the rook. So you take, knight takes, and then there's queen f3 check. It's a fork of the king and the knight. And, well, you lose the knight, or if the knight goes back, you lose the rook in the corner. So white has regained his material and is still attacking. Actually, I think in this line he's up in material. Yeah, he's up the exchange now. He's got two rooks versus 1 and 2 pieces versus 3. Yeah, so he's up the exchange and attacking. So that is just winning for white as well. So those are a couple lines for you to, if you ever find yourself in this position, how to play the Matovinsky against the Matovinsky gambit. Anyway, let's go back to the game. So takes, just to show you that it's not so easy when you're facing this over the board and you have to find all this stuff out without the help of a chess engine. King f8 was played, and then, like I said, Lombardy just took the knight, and he's better here. So it's just not as big as an advantage as those other lines. After king takes, the queen retreats, queen to g4. Now the bishop takes the rook. So black is up the exchange, and white has to bank on the attack to win. He played knight to c3 here. Knight to e2 is a better move in this position. But Lombardy went knight c3. Also a reasonable move, and keeping that advantage for white. Queen goes to f8 to maybe help defend the king. Maybe look at some counterattacking ideas. Bishop comes out to e3. Queen out to f6. And then h3. And h3 seems to be a true mistake. It's kind of natural. It's looking at the idea, what if black takes here, coordinates with the queen on this square, defends the bishop. It just looks like black is starting to get active. So if you just push this pawn forward, shuts that rook out. Seems pretty natural, but it's not the strongest move there. And in fact, knight e2, and after rook takes h2, just castling queenside, and that white should be fine there and still have a comfortable advantage, probably winning. So h3, we're back to around even here, and let's see. The game goes back and forth for quite a bit. I'll just walk through the game, I guess. I have no more commentary, but at the end of the game, it was actually a draw, and there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the game. So I can't really say what's best play here in all these cases. White had an advantage for a lot of the game, but black kept finding clever ways, and there was a certain point, I think around here, where black got the advantage, and black had some winning chances, and then black gave the game away. So it's just one of those games that's just too complicated for humans to play. But I'll include a link to the games in the description of the video, so you can check these games out yourself. But you can see there's a lot of crazy stuff going on here. So you can try out that Matovinsky gambit if you want to. Don't believe that refutation of Greco, although it is a bad gambit, so you can easily get into trouble. But anyway, the game ended with a draw here with a repetition. And you can see black actually has 2 exchanges at this point, but he's down a pawn, and I guess he was worried about this pawn coming forward, and maybe a draw is a fair result at this point, but that's how it ended. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye now.